This video is about why I strongly encourage buyers who are relocating to the Philadelphia mainline area from elsewhere, use a local lender. So there are a bunch of reasons. The first one, and I have run into this particular issue several times, is that non-local lenders often grossly miscalculate the buyer's closing costs, and inevitably they estimate them at much less than they actually are. Pennsylvania has high closing costs, and a lot of lenders who are national lenders just use an average, and they miscalculate, they give an average. They also sometimes don't understand local customs, like the fact that something we call transfer tax is not just absorbed by the seller, it is split equally between the buyer and the seller, and they often neglect to appropriate the correct amount to the buyer, and they just assume the seller's paying it all. So that's one reason why you want to use a local lender, so that you're prepared for your closing costs. A second reason is that while a local lender could indeed be a large national bank, like a Wells Fargo or something like that, I'm really talking about using a small local bank or a mortgage broker who has connections to all different programs. And the reason why I encourage people to do that is that most real estate transactions and questions and negotiations are happening outside of normal business hours. And that's because most people work a 9 to 5 type of day. So when they're looking at houses, putting offers on, it's often the evening or it's the weekends. If you're working with Wells Fargo or somebody else like that, it's very common to not be able to reach your lender except during banker's hours. And that could cost you the opportunity to actually put an offer on and have it accepted. If you need to have your pre-approval updated or something like that, but you can't reach your lender because it's a weekend, that could really hurt your chances of getting a property. Another common problem is that lenders from elsewhere may not understand local customs or rules or requirements that have to do with relocating for a job. I had a client who was relocating from South Carolina, and she had talked to a bank, and they told her that there was no issue with the way that her employment was going to work, as far as her being able to work remotely for her South Carolina university for a few months after she arrived, because her job here in Philadelphia wasn't going to start for something like 4 months. I think it had to do with the change in semester. But they assured her it would be no problem. I had her talk to my personal lender, who had said, I think this is going to be a problem. And she said, well, I talked to somebody else and I specifically asked them if it was going to be a problem, and they told me it wasn't. So she went with that bank. And then about 2 weeks before closing, wouldn't you know it, they said, oh, well, you're not starting your new job for 4 months, then we can't count that income. So now you don't qualify for the loan anymore. So she ended up scurrying back to the lender I had originally encouraged her to talk to, and he was able to pull all kinds of strings and make it happen and complete the loan and get us closed, I think maybe only a day or two late. But the point is, if you don't work with someone who is familiar with dealing with those kinds of issues, you can be in trouble. One last thing is that some lenders and banks, I guess, just assume that the real estate landscape looks the same everywhere. I was really surprised when I recently had a client who was moving from Arizona, and they had not decided whether they were going to sell their home there or not. They thought they might keep it. So they were told by their bank, who they use there, that their mortgage on the house they were purchasing here would be at a very high rate, or what I thought was a very high rate, because it was going to be considered a second home. And I said, I've moved a lot of people here and I've never heard that. Let me talk to the lender I usually use. So I called him and I said, do you have to call these second homes if somebody isn't selling the house where they currently live? He said, no. He said that kind of thinking has to do with areas where a lot of the homes, if somebody already owns one, they are second homes, like down the shore. These people were coming from Arizona. So presumably a lot of people who own a home and move to Arizona, it is a vacation home, and therefore it needs to be treated that way, and it's a higher rate. So I'm sure there are lots of other reasons to use a local lender. Those are just a few, but that's my 2 cents. So I really strongly suggest that if you are going to be moving to the area that you talk to somebody who's local.